Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women. Inside the heart of the bayou's only female prison, the iron silence. The air in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, doesn't move the way it does in other parts of the state. It sits heavy, clinging to the skin like wet fabric, thick with the smell of cypress swamps and something else, something industrial, something institutional. Just off Highway 74, past the sugarcane fields and the rusted trailers, there's a compound that most people drive past without a second glance. Razor wire catches the morning sun. Guard towers rise like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. And behind those walls, in a place where time doesn't pass the way it does on the outside, nearly 900 women wake up to another day they didn't choose. This is the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, LCIW. The locals just call it St. Gabriel. It's the only maximum security women's prison in the state. And for the women inside, it's both home and hell. There's no screaming here at dawn. No chaos. Just a metallic clank of doors unlocking in sequence, the shuffle of feet on concrete, and the low hum of fluorescent lights that never quite go out. The guards move through the corridors with practiced attachment, their boots echoing in rhythms the inmates have memorized. Some women are already awake, sitting on thin mattresses, staring at walls they've stared at for years. Others stay buried under state-issued blankets, delaying the inevitable for just a few more minutes. In cell block C, a woman named Gloria stands at her sink, washing her face with water that comes out lukewarm on a good day. She's been here since 2003, 23 years. She doesn't talk much anymore. The younger inmates think she's cold, maybe even dangerous. But the truth is simpler than that. Gloria has just learned that survival here isn't about making friends. It's about making yourself small enough that the system forgets you exist. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments. It's how this community stays connected. If this kind of true story resonates with you, like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who won't look at prisons the same way again. The kitchen workers are already moving by 5:30 in the morning, their hands wrapped in plastic gloves, their hair tied back under nets. They prepare breakfast for hundreds, grits, toast, occasionally eggs that taste like cardboard. The steam rises from industrial pots, and the women work in near silence, communicating in glances and gestures. Speaking too much draws attention. Attention draws scrutiny. Scrutiny can cost you privileges you didn't even know you still had. By 6, the doors to the main yard unlock. Women file out in small groups, some heading to work assignments, others to the library, the chapel, the medical unit. The yard itself is a wide stretch of cracked asphalt surrounded by chain-link fence. There are no trees inside the perimeter. No shade. In the summer, the heat is unbearable. In the winter, the wind cuts through the thin jackets they're issued. And yet, the yard is the closest thing to freedom most of them will feel for years. This prison wasn't always here. The land it sits on has its own history, one that stretches back long before the first cell block was poured. And the women who live here now are part of a lineage they never asked to join, a lineage of forgotten women. Discarded women. Women the state decided were beyond saving. But every one of them has a story. And some of those stories are darker than the walls that hold them. The bones of the institution. The Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women didn't begin as a place of reform. It began as a necessity born from failure. For most of the 20th century, women convicted of crimes in Louisiana were scattered across the state, held in parish jails, tucked into corners of men's facilities, sometimes forgotten entirely. There was no central institution, no unified system. Women who committed serious crimes were often transferred to out-of-state facilities because Louisiana simply didn't have the infrastructure. And in a state where incarceration rates were already among the highest in the nation, that was saying something. In 1961, the state finally made a decision. They would build a facility specifically for women. The location chosen was St. Gabriel, a small community in Iberville Parish, less than 15 miles south of Baton Rouge. The land was cheap. The location was isolated. And isolation, the architects of the system believed, was part of the punishment. Construction took years. The original design was modest by modern prison standards. A few cell blocks, a small administrative building, a yard. It was meant to house a few hundred women at most, but from the very beginning, the population exceeded projections. By the time the doors officially opened in 1968, the prison was already overcrowded. The women who arrived in those early years came from every corner of the state. Some had committed violent crimes, murder, assault, armed robbery. Others were there for drug offenses, theft, prostitution. Many were poor, many were black, and many had been brutalized long before they ever saw the inside of a prison cell. The staff was almost entirely male. The warden, the guards, the administrators, men overseeing women in a system that had no precedent for managing trauma, addiction, or the specific vulnerabilities that incarcerated women face. There were no counselors, no social workers, no programs designed to address the root causes of criminal behavior. The assumption was simple: lock them up, keep them fed, and let time do the rest. But time, in a place like this, doesn't rehabilitate. It compounds. By the 1970s, stories began to leak out. Stories of abuse, of guards trading favors for compliance, of women being punished with solitary confinement for infractions as minor as talking back. The state conducted investigations, issued reports, promised reforms, but the patterns didn't change. The system was designed to warehouse, not to heal. One of the early wardens, a man named Harold Boudreaux, ran the facility like a military base. He instituted strict routines, harsh penalties, and a zero-tolerance policy for what he called disrespect. Inmates who violated the rules were sent to lockdown, a row of cells in the basement of the main building where the lights stayed on 24 hours a day, and the only sound was the ventilation system grinding through the walls. Women who spent time in lockdown came out different, quieter, more withdrawn. Some never fully came back. Boudreaux retired in 1979. His replacement, a woman named Carolyn Thibodeau, was seen as a progressive choice. She was the first female warden in the facility's history, and she promised to bring a different approach, one rooted in rehabilitation rather than punishment. She introduced educational programs, vocational training, and regular mental health screenings. For a brief period, it seemed like things might actually change. But then the budget cuts came. Then the lawsuits. Then the riots. And LCIW became what it was always going to become: a pressure cooker with no release valve. The hierarchy of survival. Inside LCIW, there are no written rules about how to survive. But every woman who's been here longer than a month knows them by heart. The hierarchy starts the moment you walk through intake. You're stripped of your name, your identity, your autonomy. You become a number, a file, a body in a cell. But within that dehumanization, a different kind of social structure begins to form, one built on reputation, fear, and the desperate need for protection. At the top are the lifers, women serving sentences so long they've stopped counting the years. These are the women who run the cell blocks, who control the flow of contraband, who decide which new arrivals get protection and which get preyed upon. They don't need to be loud. Their power is quiet, earned through decades of navigating a system designed to break them. Gloria, the woman from Cell Block C, is one of them. She was convicted of second-degree murder in 2003 after stabbing her boyfriend during what the court records called a domestic altercation. The prosecution argued it was premeditated. Gloria's public defender argued it was self-defense. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her. She was sentenced to life without parole. In the early years, Gloria fought the system. She filed appeals. She wrote letters to advocacy groups. She clung to the belief that someone, somewhere, would see that she'd been defending herself against a man who had put her in the hospital twice before. But the appeals were denied. The letters went unanswered. And eventually, Gloria stopped fighting. She learned a different skill instead: reading people. In prison, survival depends on knowing who to trust and who to avoid. Gloria can tell within minutes of meeting someone whether they'll last a year or break within weeks. She can spot a snitch before they even realize they're going to fold under pressure. And she can sense when the guards are looking for someone to make an example of. She uses this knowledge sparingly. She doesn't get involved in other people's problems. She doesn't take sides. But when a young woman named Shanice arrived last year, 22 years old and terrified, Gloria made an exception. Shanice had been convicted of drug trafficking. It was her first offense. But Louisiana sentencing laws are among the harshest in the country. She got 15 years. No prior record. No violent history. Just a girl from New Orleans who made the wrong choice with the wrong people. On her third night, Shanice was cornered in the showers by two women from Cell Block D. They wanted to know if she had people on the outside who could send money. They wanted to know if she'd be willing to carry messages, to hold contraband, to do favors. The questions were phrased politely, but the threat underneath was clear. Gloria stepped in. She didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and waited until the two women left. Shanice never found out what Gloria said to them later, but they never approached her again. Shanice tried to thank her. Gloria told her to forget it. Then she gave her the only advice that mattered. Keep your head down. Don't owe anybody anything. And don't trust the ones who smile too much. Beneath the lifers are the mid-timers, women serving sentences between 5 and 20 years. They're caught in a strange limbo, too long to maintain hope of a quick release, but not long enough to fully surrender to reality of prison life. Some of them cling to the idea of parole, even when the statistics say it's unlikely. Others use their time to build skills, attend classes, participate in programs. They're the ones who still believe the system might give them a second chance. Then there are the short-timers. Women serving 6 months, a year, maybe 2. They're the most unpredictable. Some of them walk in with an attitude, convinced they're tougher than they are. Others are broken before they even arrive, coming in from county jails where they've already been ground down. The short-timers are the ones most likely to cause problems. Not because they're dangerous, but because they haven't yet learned how to be invisible. And at the very bottom are the vulnerable ones. Women with mental illness. Women who can't read or write. Women who are too old, too sick, too isolated to defend themselves. In a system that rewards strength and punishes weakness, these women become targets. LCIW has a mental health unit, but it's chronically understaffed. There are supposed to be regular psychiatric evaluations, medication management, crisis intervention. In reality, women with severe mental illness are often medicated into compliance and left in their cells. When they have episodes, screaming, self-harm, psychotic breaks, they're restrained and moved to isolation until they calm down. One woman, a 48-year-old named Denise, has been in and out of the mental health unit for years. She was convicted of arson after setting fire to an abandoned building during a manic episode. She has bipolar disorder, but her medication has been changed so many times she can't remember what she's supposed to be taking. Sometimes she's lucid. Other times she talks to people who aren't there. The guards know her. Some of them are patient with her. Others treat her like a nuisance. And the other inmates mostly avoid her, because getting too close to someone like Denise means becoming associated with instability. And instability, in here, is dangerous. But the hierarchy isn't just among the inmates. It extends to the staff as well. There are guards who see their job as a paycheck, and nothing more. They show up, do their round, and go home. They don't learn names. They don't ask questions. They enforce the rules mechanically, without thought or empathy. Then there are the guards who enjoy the power. The ones who linger too long during cell checks. The ones who make comments about an inmate's appearance. The ones who find reasons to write disciplinary reports for women they don't like. These guards are the ones the inmates learn to avoid, to appease, to never be alone with. And then, rarely, there are guards who still see the women as human beings. They're the ones who slip extra food to someone who's struggling, who look the other way when a rule is bent but not broken, who listen when an inmate says she's afraid. One of those guards is a man named Officer Landry. He's been working at LCIW for 12 years. He's seen women come in as teenagers and leave as grandmothers. He's seen riots, overdoses, suicides. And he's one of the few people in the facility who still believes that most of the women inside don't belong there. Landry doesn't talk about it with the other guards. That kind of thinking makes you soft, and soft guards don't last. But every so often, when he's walking the yard or doing a cell check, he'll stop and ask someone how they're doing. Really ask. And sometimes that small act of recognition is enough to keep a woman from giving up entirely. But Landry is the exception. Most of the guards have learned the same lesson the inmates have. Don't care too much, because caring will destroy you. And in a place where everyone is trying to survive, compassion is the rarest currency of all. The currency of contraband. In a place where everything is controlled. When you eat, when you sleep, when you speak, when you move, the black market becomes a form of resistance. It's not just about goods. It's about autonomy, about choice, about feeling, even for a moment, like you have power over something in your life. At LCIW, contraband flows through the prison like blood through veins. It's everywhere and it's nowhere. The guards know it exists. The administration knows it exists. But stopping it entirely would require a level of surveillance and control that even a maximum security facility can't sustain. The most common contraband is the simplest. Food. The meals served in the cafeteria are nutritionally adequate, technically speaking, but they're bland, repetitive, and rationed down to the calorie. Women crave flavor. They crave comfort. So they trade. A bag of hot Cheetos from the commissary can buy you a favor. A honey bun can settle a debt. Instant ramen packets, the gold standard of prison currency, can be exchanged for almost anything. Women who work in the kitchen sometimes smuggle out extras, an apple, a packet of sugar, a sleeve of crackers. These small thefts are risky, but the rewards make it worthwhile. Then there are the drugs. LCIW is supposed to be a controlled environment. Every visitor is screened. Every package is inspected. Every inmate is subject to random searches. But drugs still find their way inside, because where there's demand, supply follows. The most prevalent drug is Suboxone, a medication used to treat opioid addiction. It's prescribed to some inmates as part of medication-assisted treatment, but it's also highly tradable. Women who receive it legally will sometimes cheek their doses, pretend to swallow while holding the strip under their tongue or against their cheek. Later, they'll spit it out, dry it, and sell it to other inmates who are either struggling with withdrawal or looking for a high. Marijuana comes in less frequently, but it comes. Sometimes it's smuggled in by visitors during contact visits, passed mouth to mouth during a kiss, or tucked into a child's diaper. Sometimes it's thrown over the fence in packages late at night, retrieved by inmates on yard detail, who know exactly where to look. Methamphetamine is rarer, but more dangerous. It creates paranoia, aggression, and unpredictability, traits that can turn a tense situation into a violent one in seconds. When meth circulates through the prison, the guards can feel it. The atmosphere shifts. Fights break out more frequently. Women who are usually calm become erratic. And then there's alcohol. Inmates make it themselves, a crude form of prison wine called Pruno. The recipe is simple: fruit, sugar, bread, water, and thyme. The ingredients are fermented in sealed plastic bags, hidden in toilets, under beds, in ventilation grates. The smell is unmistakable, sour, yeasty, rotten. But by the time the guards notice it, the batch is usually already consumed. Drinking Pruno is a gamble. Sometimes it ferments properly and produces a weak, foul-tasting alcohol. Sometimes it goes wrong and causes severe illness. Women have been hospitalized with botulism, severe dehydration, and alcohol poisoning from drinking bad batches. But the desire to escape, even briefly, is strong enough that they take the risk. Contraband isn't just about substances. It's also about connection. Cell phones are the holy grail of prison contraband. They're small, valuable, and incredibly difficult to obtain. A single phone can sell for thousands of dollars in prison currency. Commissary credits, favors, protection. Women use them to call their children, to maintain relationships with family members who can't afford a visit, to conduct business on the outside that keeps money flowing into their accounts. The phones come in through a variety of channels. Corrupt guards are the most reliable source. A guard making $35,000 a year can supplement their income significantly by smuggling in a phone once a month. The transaction is simple. Money is deposited into an account on the outside, and the phone appears inside. Other times, phones are smuggled in by maintenance workers, contractors, or volunteers. Anyone who has access to the prison without being subjected to the same level of scrutiny as inmates becomes a potential pipeline. Once a phone is inside, it's hidden obsessively. Women carve out hiding spots in mattresses, inside radios, behind light fixtures. Some women hide phones internally, enduring the discomfort and risk of infection to keep their connection to the outside world. When a phone is discovered during a shakedown, the punishment is severe: loss of privileges, months in solitary confinement, loss of good behavior credits that could have led to early release. But the demand never decreases, because in a place where isolation is the norm, a phone represents hope. There are other, stranger forms of contraband: tattoo guns made from radio parts, guitar strings, and pen casings, makeup smuggled in or improvised from Kool-Aid and baby oil, weapons, shanks made from sharpened toothbrushes, razors melted into plastic handles, locks stuffed into socks. Most women never carry weapons, but some do. Women who have enemies, women who are afraid, women who have learned that in prison, the appearance of being dangerous is sometimes more important than actually being dangerous. The black market also runs on a more intimate currency: relationships. In a facility where men are rare and heterosexual relationships are impossible, many women form romantic and sexual relationships with each other. Some of these relationships are genuine, born from loneliness, affection, and the need for human connection. Others are transactional. A woman with money or influence might offer protection, commissary goods, or safety in exchange for companionship. These relationships are known as prison gay by some inmates, a term that suggests the attraction is situational rather than inherent. But for others, the relationships are real and lasting. Some women enter LCIW identifying as straight and leave identifying as lesbian or bisexual. Some maintain these relationships even after release. The administration officially prohibits sexual contact between inmates. It's classified as a disciplinary violation, but enforcement is inconsistent. Guards who catch two women together might issue a warning, write them up, or ignore it entirely depending on their mood and their personal beliefs. What makes the situation more complicated is the presence of male guards. Over the years, there have been numerous allegations, some substantiated, some not, of male guards engaging in sexual relationships with inmates. These relationships are never consensual in the legal sense, because inmates cannot consent to sex with someone in a position of power over them. But they happen. Sometimes the guard initiates. Sometimes the inmate does, seeing it as a way to gain favor, access, or protection. Either way, the power imbalance makes the relationship inherently coercive. In 2012, a correctional officer named Travis Reeves was arrested and charged with multiple counts of sexual misconduct with inmates. The investigation revealed that he had been involved with at least 4 different women over a 2-year period. He brought them gifts, he gave them contraband, and in exchange, they provided him with something the prison system had stripped from them: the illusion of choice. Reeves was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. He served 18 months. The women he was involved with were punished as well, moved to different cell blocks, placed in restrictive housing, denied parole consideration. The system treated them as accomplices rather than victims. The contraband economy at LCIW is a shadow system that exists in parallel to the official one. It's a system built on desperation, ingenuity, and the fundamental human need to control something, anything, in an environment designed to strip that control away. And it's a system that will never be fully eradicated, because as long as there are women inside those walls, there will be women finding ways to survive. The breaking point. Every prison has a breaking point, a moment when the pressure that's been building for months or years finally finds a crack in the foundation and explodes outward. At LCIW, that moment came in the summer of 2008. The temperature that June was brutal, even by Louisiana standards. The heat index topped 110 degrees for days on end. Inside the cell blocks, where there was no air conditioning and only minimal ventilation, the air became thick and suffocating. Women soaked their sheets in cold water and draped them over their bodies just to make it through the night. The guards, who at least had access to fans and cold drinks in their break rooms, moved slowly through their rounds, irritable and exhausted. But the heat was only part of it. Earlier that year, the state had implemented a series of budget cuts to the Department of Corrections. Programs were slashed. Staffing levels were reduced. Medical services were scaled back. At LCIW, This meant longer waits to see a doctor, fewer educational opportunities, and a reduction in the already limited mental health resources. The inmates felt it immediately. Women who had been attending GED classes found their programs canceled. Women who relied on regular psychiatric medication found their prescriptions delayed or changed without explanation. Women who worked prison jobs for pennies an hour found their hours cut, which meant less money for commissary, less ability to buy the small comforts that made prison life bearable. Tension began to simmer. Arguments broke out more frequently. Small disagreements escalated into physical confrontations. The guards responded with harsher discipline, which only made things worse. In late June, a woman named Kimberly Hayes died in her cell. She was 34 years old, serving a 10-year sentence for armed robbery. She had complained of chest pain for 3 days. She had requested to see a doctor. She had been told to submit a sick call request and wait her turn. By the time medical staff finally saw her, she was unconscious. She was transported to a hospital in Baton Rouge, where she was pronounced dead from a pulmonary embolism. The official report stated that her death was due to a pre-existing condition that had gone undiagnosed. The report did not mention the 3-day delay in treatment. Word of Kimberly's death spread through the prison within hours. The women knew her. She had been well-liked, quiet, someone who kept to herself. She had 2 young sons on the outside. And now she was gone, and many of the inmates believed it was because the system had decided her life wasn't worth the cost of timely medical care. The anger was immediate, and it was focused. On the evening of June 28th, approximately 50 women refused to return to their cells after dinner. They gathered in the main yard, sitting in silence, arms linked. It wasn't a violent protest. It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was simply a refusal to comply. The guards ordered them to disperse. The women didn't move. Additional guards were called in. The warden, a man named Richard Stalder, arrived on the scene. He spoke to the women through a megaphone, warning them that they were violating institutional rules and would face serious consequences if they didn't return to their cells immediately. One of the women, a lifer named Brenda Moss, stood up and spoke for the group. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening. She was just stating facts. "We're not being treated like human beings," she said. "Kimberly died because nobody cared enough to help her. We're sick, we're overheated, and we're being ignored. We're not moving until someone listens." Stalder gave them one more warning. Then he gave the order. The guards moved in with riot shields and batons. The women didn't resist. They sat with their arms linked, and the guards pulled them apart one by one, dragging them back toward the cell blocks. Some of the women went limp, forcing the guards to carry them. Others walked on their own, but refused to cooperate beyond that. By the time it was over, 32 women had been placed in administrative segregation. Brenda Moss was charged with inciting a riot and sentenced to 2 years in solitary confinement. The other women lost privileges, lost good time credits, and were transferred to different cell blocks to prevent further organization. The protest lasted less than 2 hours, but the effects rippled through the prison for years. The administration issued a statement calling the incident a disturbance and emphasizing that order had been quickly restored. They did not address the concerns about medical care. They did not acknowledge Kimberly Hayes by name. And they did not make any changes to the policies that had sparked the protest in the first place. But the women inside didn't forget, and neither did the outside world, at least not entirely. A local advocacy group, the Louisiana Coalition for Women Prisoners, picked up the story. They filed complaints with the Department of Corrections. They reached out to journalists. They documented patterns of neglect, abuse, and systemic failures within LCIW. Some of the reporting stuck. There were articles in the Baton Rouge Advocate. There were segments on local news stations. For a brief moment, the public was paying attention. Then the news cycle moved on. Another scandal, another crisis, and LCIW faded back into obscurity. But inside the prison, things had changed. The women had learned something important. They could push back, they could resist. And even if the consequences were severe, even if nothing actually changed, the act of resistance itself mattered. Brenda Moss spent 2 years in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a cell the size of a parking space. 1 hour in a concrete recreation pen. No human contact except for the guards who delivered her meals through a slot in the door. When she was finally released back into general population, she was different, thinner, quieter. Her eyes had a hollow look that never quite went away. Some of the women tried to talk to her, to thank her for what she'd done. She didn't want to hear it. It didn't change anything, she said. We're still here. They're still in charge. And the next woman who needs help is still going to die waiting for it. She was right. Over the next decade, there would be more deaths, more protests, more promises of reform that never materialized. But the memory of that June night stayed alive in the minds of the women who had been there. They passed the story down to new arrivals. They kept Kimberly Hayes' name alive. And they reminded each other that even in a system designed to break them, they still had the power to say no, even if saying no came with a price they could barely afford to pay. The ghosts of the system. There are women at LCIW who have been erased from memory. Women who arrived with sentences so long that their families eventually stopped visiting, stopped writing, stopped remembering. Women who have been inside so long that the world they left behind no longer exists. One of those women is named Doris Simmons. Doris has been incarcerated at LCIW since 1984. 42 years. She was 23 when she arrived, convicted of first-degree murder in the death of her 6-month-old daughter. The prosecution argued that Doris had shaken the baby to death during a moment of frustration. Doris maintained that the child had fallen while she was carrying her down a flight of stairs. The medical examiner testified that the injuries were consistent with shaken baby syndrome. Doris's defense attorney, a public defender handling over 60 cases simultaneously, failed to present expert testimony that might have challenged that conclusion. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Doris was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. She was processed into LCIW on a cold November morning. They took her photograph, issued her a number, and assigned her to cell block A. She remembers walking through those corridors for the first time, feeling like she was drowning, like the walls were closing in from all sides. That was 42 years ago. Doris is now 65 years old. Her hair has gone completely gray. She moves slowly, her knees worn down by decades of walking on concrete. She works in the prison library, a small room with outdated books and a few computers that are only allowed to access educational programs. She shelves returns. She helps other inmates fill out legal forms. She reads constantly because reading is the only way she knows to leave the prison without actually leaving. Her family is gone. Her mother passed away in 1997. Her father died 2 years later. She had a younger brother who used to visit occasionally in the early years, but those visits tapered off and eventually stopped. She hasn't heard from him in over a decade. She doesn't know if he's alive or dead. Doris has no photographs of her daughter. The state confiscated them during the investigation, and they were never returned. For years, she could remember her daughter's face clearly, the shape of her eyes, the way her mouth curved when she smiled. But memory fades. Now, when Doris tries to picture her daughter, the image is blurry, incomplete. She's terrified that one day she'll forget entirely. She filed her first appeal in 1986. It was denied. She filed another in 1991. Denied. In 2004, new evidence emerged. Research showing that many cases of shaken baby syndrome had been misdiagnosed, that the medical signs once considered definitive proof were actually ambiguous and could be caused by other factors including accidental falls. Doris's case was taken up by the Innocence Project. They filed for post-conviction relief, arguing that she had been convicted based on flawed science and inadequate legal representation. The motion was denied. The judge ruled that the new evidence was not sufficient to overturn the original conviction. Doris hasn't filed another appeal since. She's out of money. She's out of legal options. And she's out of hope. But she's not the only one. There are dozens of women at LCIW serving sentences that, by modern standards, seem unconscionably harsh. Women convicted under mandatory minimum laws that have since been reformed. Women sentenced as accomplices to crimes they didn't directly commit. women who were children when they were arrested and are now approaching middle age, still locked away. One woman, a 48-year-old named Angela Price, was convicted at 17 of being an accessory to armed robbery. She was the girlfriend of a man who robbed a convenience store. She was in the car. She didn't enter the store. She didn't hold a weapon. But under Louisiana's felony murder rule, she was held equally responsible when the store clerk was shot and killed during the robbery. Angela was sentenced to life without parole. She's been incarcerated for 31 years. She was a child when she went in. She's a woman now, with arthritis in her hands and reading glasses perched on her nose. She's earned a bachelor's degree through correspondence courses. She's completed every rehabilitation program the prison offers. She's had a spotless disciplinary record for over 2 decades. None of it matters. Life without parole means exactly what it says. Angela's case was recently reviewed by a clemency board. They recommended that her sentence be commuted to life with the possibility of parole. The recommendation went to the governor's desk. He denied it without explanation. There are other ghosts, too, women who have died inside these walls and whose deaths barely register beyond the prison. In 2015, a 56-year-old woman named Patricia Green collapsed in the yard during recreation time. She had been complaining of chest pain for weeks. She had submitted multiple sick call requests. Each time, she was given ibuprofen and told to rest. When she collapsed, it took 12 minutes for medical staff to arrive. By the time they did, she was already gone. The autopsy revealed a massive heart attack caused by untreated coronary artery disease. Patricia had served 19 years of a 25-year sentence for drug trafficking. She had 6 years left. She would have been 51 when she was released. Instead, she died on hot asphalt, surrounded by women who knew her name but couldn't save her. Her death was investigated internally. The report concluded that medical staff had followed proper protocols and that there was no evidence of negligence. The family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. It was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The terms of the settlement included a non-disclosure agreement, which meant Patricia's family could never speak publicly about what happened to her. In 2018, a 32-year-old woman named Jasmine Carter hanged herself in her cell. She had been diagnosed with severe depression and PTSD. She had been prescribed medication, but the dosage had been changed multiple times due to supply shortages. In the weeks before her death, she had told other inmates that she couldn't take it anymore, that she felt like she was disappearing. She asked to see a counselor. She was put on a waiting list. The wait time was 3 weeks. She didn't make it 3 weeks. Jasmine's body was discovered during morning count. The guards cut her down and attempted CPR, but she had been dead for hours. She left behind a letter addressed to her mother, apologizing for not being strong enough to survive. Her death was ruled a suicide. There was an internal review. Policy changes were recommended. A suicide prevention task force was formed. 6 months later, another woman attempted suicide in the same cell block. She survived, but only because her cellmate found her in time. The task force was quietly disbanded. These stories don't make the news. They don't spark outrage or protests. They're filed away in reports that few people read and fewer people care about, because the women at LCIW are invisible. They're the people society has decided it's acceptable to forget, but the women inside remember each other. They hold funerals in a chapel, small gatherings where they sing hymns and share memories. They write the names of the dead in notebooks, creating informal memorials that the guards don't confiscate because they don't see the harm. And they keep living, because what else can they do? Doris Simmons will likely die at LCIW. She knows this. She's made peace with it, in the way that people make peace with inevitabilities they can't change. She's requested that when she dies, her body be donated to science. She doesn't have family to claim her. She doesn't have money for a burial. At least this way, she thinks, her death might serve some purpose. She's written her own obituary. She keeps it tucked inside her Bible. It's short, just a few lines. It says her name, her date of birth, and a single sentence. She was more than what happened to her. It's the only legacy she has left. The mothers and the children. The cruelest punishment at LCIW isn't the bars or the concrete or the isolation. It's the separation from children. Approximately 70% of the women incarcerated at LCIW are mothers. They have children on the outside, children being raised by grandmothers, aunts, foster families, or strangers, children who are growing up without them, children who will carry the weight of that absence for the rest of their lives. The prison allows visits, but the logistics are complicated. St. Gabriel is in a rural part of Louisiana, difficult to reach without a car. Many of the women inside come from New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, cities that are hours away. Their families are often poor, working multiple jobs, struggling to make ends meet. The cost of gas, the time off work, the emotional toll of bringing a child into a prison. It's too much for many families to sustain. So the visits become less frequent. Once a month becomes once every few months, then twice a year, then only on birthdays or holidays. And eventually, for some women, the visits stop altogether. There's a woman in cell block B named Rochelle Davis. She has 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. When she was arrested in 2011 for distribution of narcotics, her daughters were 8 and 6 and her son was 3. She was sentenced to 20 years. For the first 2 years, her mother brought the children to visit every other weekend. Rochelle would wait in the visitation room, watching the door, holding her breath until she saw their faces. The visits were precious and painful. Her children would cling to her, and when the time was up, they would cry. Sometimes they would scream. The guards would have to pull them away, while Rochelle stood there, handcuffed, unable to comfort them. Her mother kept bringing them, even though it would destroy her financially and emotionally. But then her mother had a stroke. She survived, but her mobility was limited, and she could no longer make the drive. Rochelle's children went to live with an aunt in Texas. The aunt tried to bring them to visit, but Texas to Louisiana is a long trip, and the aunt had her own children to care for. The visits became sporadic. Now, Rochelle hasn't seen her children in person in over 4 years. She talks to them on the phone when she can afford it. The prison phone system charges exorbitant rates, sometimes as much as $1 per minute. A 15-minute call can cost $15, money that has to come from Rochelle's commissary account, which is funded by whatever little money her family can send or whatever she earns from her prison job, which pays 18 cents an hour. She writes letters constantly, long letters where she tells her children about her day, asks them about school, tries to offer guidance and support from behind bars. She doesn't know if they read them. Her son, who is now 14, hasn't responded to a letter in 2 years. Her oldest daughter writes occasionally, but the letters are short, distant. Her youngest daughter still writes regularly, and those letters are the only thing keeping Rochelle tethered to hope. But she can feel them slipping away. She can feel the distance growing. And there's nothing she can do about it. LCIW does have programs designed to help incarcerated mothers maintain connections with their children. There's a parenting class that teaches basic child development and communication skills. There's a program called Mothers and Babies, where women can record themselves reading children's books, and the recordings are sent to their children along with a copy of the book. Rochelle participated in that program. She recorded herself reading The Very Hungry Caterpillar and Where the Wild Things Are. She tried to make her voice warm and animated, the way she used to read to her children before she was taken away. She sent the recordings to her aunt's address in Texas. She never found out if her children listened to them. Then there were the women who were pregnant when they were incarcerated, women who gave birth in chains and had their babies taken away within hours. Louisiana law requires that incarcerated women be shackled during transport to hospitals for labor and delivery. The practice is supposed to be for security purposes, though statistically, a woman in active labor is not a flight risk. The shackles are only removed during the actual delivery, and they're often put back on immediately afterward. One woman, a 26-year-old named Tamara Johnson, gave birth to a son in 2016 while serving a 7-year sentence for theft and fraud. She was transported to a hospital in Baton Rouge in leg irons and handcuffs. She labored for 14 hours. When her son was born, she was allowed to hold him for less than 20 minutes before a social worker from the Department of Children and Family Services took him away. Tamara never saw him again. He was placed in foster care, and the foster parents eventually adopted him. Tamara's parental rights were terminated while she was still incarcerated, on the grounds that she was unable to provide care for the child and had not demonstrated rehabilitation. She filed an appeal. It was denied. The judge ruled that incarceration, combined with her criminal history, made her an unfit parent. Tamara was released in 2023 after serving her full sentence. She tried to locate her son. She hired a lawyer with money she'd saved from working 2 jobs after her release. The lawyer told her that because the adoption was finalized, her legal rights as a biological parent no longer existed. She would need to petition the court to have the adoption overturned, which would require proving that the adoption was not in the child's best interest. Given that the child had been with the adoptive parents for 7 years, the likelihood of success was almost zero. Tamara gave up. She doesn't talk about her son anymore, but she keeps a photograph, a single image taken by a nurse in the delivery room, showing her holding a tiny infant with her wrists still marked by restraints. It's the only picture she has. The trauma of separation affects the children as profoundly as it affects the mothers. Studies show that children of incarcerated parents are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, behavioral problems, and academic difficulties. They're more likely to become involved in the criminal justice system themselves. The cycle perpetuates. There's a small nonprofit organization in Baton Rouge called Children of the Incarcerated that runs a program specifically for kids with parents at LCIW. They organize group visits where children can spend time with their mothers in a less restrictive environment than the typical visitation room. They provide transportation for families who can't afford it. They offer counseling and support groups for the children, but they're understaffed and underfunded. They can only serve a fraction of the children who need help. One of the counselors, a woman named Evelyn Torres, has been working with these children for over a decade. She's heard every version of the same story. Children who are angry at their mothers, children who are ashamed, children who lie to their friends about where their mother is, children who act out because they don't know how to process the grief and confusion. She's also seen the resilience. Children who refuse to give up on their mothers. Children who write letters every week. Children who count down the days until their mother's release and make plans for what they'll do together. But resilience has a cost, and trauma leaves scars that don't always heal. Inside LCIW, Mother's Day is the hardest day of the year. The sadness is palpable. Women who are usually composed break down. Women who have mastered the art of emotional control can't hold it together. The prison chaplain organizes a special service in the chapel. They sing songs. They pray. They light candles for the children they can't hold. And then they return to their cells, where the silence is heavier than it was before. Rochelle spends every Mother's Day the same way. She wakes up early before count. She sits on her bunk and looks at the photographs she's taped to the wall above her bed. Photos of her children that are now years out of date. She tries to imagine what they look like now, how tall they've gotten, whether they still have the same smiles. And then she writes them a letter. She tells them she loves them. She tells them she's sorry. She tells them that when she gets out, she's going to make up for all the time she's lost. She doesn't know if they believe her. She doesn't know if she believes herself. But she writes the letter anyway, because it's the only thing she can do. The question of redemption. There's a question that hangs over every prison, unspoken but always present. Can people change? The criminal justice system operates on conflicting assumptions. On one hand, it claims to believe in rehabilitation, in the idea that people who have committed crimes can be reformed, can re-enter society, can become productive citizens. On the other hand, it punishes with finality that suggests the opposite, that some people are beyond saving, that some mistakes are permanent, that some debts can never be repaid. At LCIW, this contradiction plays out in the lives of women who are trying, against overwhelming odds, to prove they're more than the worst thing they've ever done. There's a woman named Vanessa Cole, who arrived at LCIW in 2005. She was 21 years old, convicted of manslaughter after killing her boyfriend's drug dealer in what the court determined was not self-defense but retaliation. She was sentenced to 30 years. Vanessa spent her first 5 years angry. Angry at the system. Angry at her lawyer. angry at herself. She got into fights. She racked up disciplinary infractions. She spent months at a time in segregation. She was, by every metric the prison uses, a problem inmate. But something shifted when she turned 30. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was clarity. Maybe it was just a realization that she had already wasted a decade and couldn't afford to waste another. She started attending every program the prison offered. She earned her GED, then enrolled in college courses through a correspondence program. She completed anger management training, substance abuse counseling, victim impact classes. She became a mentor to younger inmates, teaching them how to navigate the system without destroying themselves in the process. She stopped fighting. She started reading. She discovered philosophy, particularly the writings of Viktor Frankl and his concept of finding meaning even in suffering. She began to see her incarceration not as a punishment to be endured, but as a life to be lived with intention. By 2018, Vanessa had been model inmate for over a decade. She had a spotless disciplinary record. She had letters of recommendation from staff members, chaplains, and fellow inmates. She had completed every rehabilitation program available, and she had become eligible for parole. Her first parole hearing lasted 15 minutes. The board reviewed her file, asked her a few questions about her crime and her rehabilitation efforts, and then told her she would receive a decision by mail. The decision came 6 weeks later. Parole denied. The letter offered no detailed explanation. It simply stated that the board did not believe she had demonstrated sufficient remorse or rehabilitation, and that her release would not be in the best interest of public safety. Vanessa was devastated. She had done everything the system had asked her to do. She had changed. She had proven it, and it still wasn't enough. She filed for another parole hearing 2 years later. Again, she was denied. Then again in 2022. Denied. Each denial felt like a confirmation of what she had always suspected, that the system doesn't actually believe in redemption. It believes in punishment. And no amount of change, no amount of effort, no amount of transformation will ever be enough to erase the fact that she took a life. But Vanessa didn't give up, because giving up would mean accepting that the last 20 years meant nothing, that all the work she'd done to become a better person was pointless. She's now 40 years old. She has another parole hearing scheduled for next year. She's not optimistic, but she's preparing anyway, writing her statement, gathering more letters of support, practicing her answers to the questions she knows they'll ask. Because what else can she do? There are other women at LCIW who have similar stories. Women who have genuinely changed, who have done the work, who have become people their younger selves wouldn't recognize. And yet the system treats them as if they're frozen in time, forever defined by the moment of their worst decision. But there are also success stories. Women who have been released and have managed to rebuild their lives on the outside. A woman named Linda Washington was released in 2019 after serving 18 years for armed robbery. She had no family waiting for her, no job lined up, no place to live. She was given a bus ticket, $200, and the address of a halfway house in Baton Rouge. The odds were stacked against her. The recidivism rate for women released from Louisiana prisons is over 40% within 3 years. Most of them end up back inside not because they commit new violent crimes, but because they violate parole conditions, missing a meeting with their parole officer, failing a drug test, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Linda could have easily become another statistic, but she didn't. She found work washing dishes at a diner. It paid minimum wage, but it was legal and it was hers. She attended every mandated parole meeting. She stayed clean. She found a small apartment in a rough neighborhood and made it her own. After 2 years, she was hired as a peer counselor at a reentry program for formerly incarcerated women. She used her experience, her mistakes, her survival to help others navigate the same impossible terrain she had crossed. She's now been out for 6 years. She has a full-time job. She has her own place. She has reconnected with her daughter, who had been raised by Linda's sister while she was incarcerated. The relationship is complicated, fragile, still healing, but it exists. Linda is one of the lucky ones, and she knows it. She also knows that luck shouldn't be a factor. That a system designed to rehabilitate shouldn't rely on individual resilience and fortunate circumstances to determine who makes it and who doesn't. Back inside LCIW, women like Vanessa watch the calendar, count the days, and wonder if they'll ever get the chance lend to God. They wonder if the work they're doing matters. They wonder if the system will ever see them as anything more than their case numbers and conviction records. Some of them hold on to faith. Others hold on to anger. And some just hold on because letting go would mean drowning. The question of redemption doesn't have a clear answer. Not in the criminal justice system. Not in society. Not even in the hearts of the women themselves, who carry guilt and trauma and the weight of lives interrupted. What is clear is this: people are not static. They grow. They change. They learn. And a system that refuses to acknowledge that capacity for change is not a system of justice. It's a system of warehousing, of abandonment, of erasure. And the women at LCIW live inside that contradiction every single day. The walls that remain. The sun sets over St. Gabriel the same way it does everywhere else. The sky turns orange, then purple, then black. The lights inside LCIW flicker on, harsh fluorescent brightness that erases shadow and softness. Another day ends. Another night begins. And the rhythm continues, unchanging, relentless. For the women inside those walls, time moves differently than it does on the outside. Days blend together. Months disappear. Years accumulate like sediment, layer upon layer, until the person you were when you arrived is buried so deep you can barely remember her. Some of the women you've heard about in this story are still there. Gloria, still moving through the cell blocks with quiet authority. Shanice, learning to navigate a world she never wanted to be part of. Doris Simmons, shelving books in a library, waiting for a freedom that will never come. Vanessa Cole, preparing for another parole hearing, clinging to hope that feels more like a burden than a gift. Others are gone. Kimberly Hayes, Patricia Green, Jasmine Carter. Their names added to an informal memorial that exists only in the memories of those who knew them. And there are new women arriving every week. Scared, angry, broken, beginning their own journey through a system that will test them in ways they can't yet imagine. LCIW is not unique. Across the United States, there are prisons just like it, facilities where women are held in conditions that range from inadequate to inhumane, where mothers are separated from their children, where mental illness is treated as a disciplinary problem, where medical neglect is routine, where the idea of rehabilitation is spoken but rarely practiced. The stories inside these walls are not entertaining. They're not redemptive in the way we might want them to be. They don't offer easy answers or satisfying conclusions. They're messy, painful, and uncomfortable, because that's what the reality of mass incarceration is. But these stories matter, because the women living them matter. They are daughters, mothers, sisters, friends. They are human beings who made mistakes, who were failed by systems long before they ever entered the criminal justice system, who are now paying prices that far exceed the crimes they committed. The question we have to ask ourselves is this: what kind of society are we building when we treat incarceration as a solution to problems that are fundamentally social, economic, and medical? What does it say about us that we're willing to lock people away and forget about them? The walls of LCIW are real, but the walls we built in our collective conscience, the ones that allow us to look away, to forget, to accept that this is just how things are, those walls are even harder to break down. Behind the razor wire and concrete, in the heart of the Louisiana bayou, nearly 900 women are living lives we don't see. They're surviving. They're suffering. They're changing. They're hoping. And whether we acknowledge it or not, they're still part of our society, still part of our responsibility, still deserving of dignity, care, and the possibility of redemption. The story of LCIW is not just their story. It's ours too. And until we're willing to confront that truth, the cycle will continue, the walls will remain, and women will keep disappearing into a system that was never designed to bring them back.